Welcome to the 5 Week Linguist Show. Over the next few weeks, I wanted to share with you some of my favorite low prep, sanity saving ideas for language classrooms. Before we get started, I just wanted to say that most activities for languages can be adapted to any level, really. Just a basic rule of thumb, if it's designed for beginners, it's obviously at the word and phrase level. Um, you can adapt the same activity to the intermediate level by having the input be longer and having them produce output that's sort of sentences becoming paragraphs. And advanced, of course, is longer paragraphs. So A, novice, words and phrases; B, intermediate, sentences becoming paragraphs; and then C, advance, paragraphs becoming extended discourse. So this first activity isn't really an activity in itself, but rather just a way of sort of reviewing or um, organizing a class period when you're not going to introduce anything new necessarily, but something that requires a lot of practice. And basically, it can be really complicated and it can be really quite simple, but I think these are great for language teachers. So essentially, in primary schools or elementary schools, there are a lot of centers, right? They're learning centers, places for exploration. So the way this might look in an elementary school might be, a reading center, um, in some classrooms, in addition to all the other reading that's done, and maybe, a particular sort of science, some theme specific science activity at another one, etc. And they can be really complicated to set up, but these are actually really fun for language teachers if you just kind of need a little bit of, I'm not want to call it downtime, but a way to give your students a lot of review. And you're not on the whole time, you're just sort of asking or answering questions. But uh, some ideas for centers. So you might have, depending on how many students you have and how much time you have, set up some centers for your students to move through during a class period. So a really simple example would be numbers, learning numbers. In one center, they might have a little bingo game, and one of the students can be the caller. In another center, you might have a board game that you play in your classes in small groups, practicing numbers. In another center, you might have a card game. So a fun one for numbers would be war, for example, where students write out numbers on index cards, they shuffle them up, deal them out, and they both put down their number. And you can change the rules. They either say, this is, they say both numbers in the target language and they can keep both cards, or they say theirs, whoever says theirs first, etc. But you get the picture. It's basically places for kids to go and practice. And they can be, you might have one center that is hangman, for example. You might have another center where they're all playing with that same set of vocabulary or grammar, Pictionary or charades at another one. Another one might be go fish. Another one might be draw what I say. So you get the picture. It's really a way to reinforce something with a bunch of different activities. And if you're feeling, I think they're great for when you're feeling a bit a bit wanting to infuse some energy and take some activities and just a nice change of pace. This next activity is called Nature Walk. And it's one of my very favorites. So you'll take your target language and you're going to write a lot of words pertaining to nature, or not so many words, depending on the level of your students, on a piece of paper. And I like to hand out clipboards, but you don't have to. And you tell them that they can use each other, they can negotiate meaning, they can they can do anything but ask you or look up the words. And they get working together and you go out for a walk and they check off what they see and they discuss what the words mean. So they should either find an example of everything. You can even have them take a picture or just do a simple doodle next to the word so they know what it means as you go out for a walk. So you're out walking, they've got this target language input, they're looking for specific things and they're getting deep into this vocabulary. Then, after you've done this, they sit down and all sort of brainstorm and put together what these words mean instead of just looking them up, right? So they really discuss them. Then taking these words, they sit down and draw a nature scene using however many words you want to tell them that they have to include. It's a great, fun way to get outside, learn different vocabulary. Obviously, in the wintertime, if the weather's not so great, that's probably not an ideal time to do it. You can even do, a walk that's shorter if it's cold and maybe not rainy. You get the picture. You just adapt it to your situation. It's a lot of fun. It's a nice change of pace, and it's a great way to get outside and to get some movement. This next one is simply it's similar to the centers that I talked about earlier, but it's just a little choice board, and you might even want to have just a simple Google slide will do. You can even, put these little blocks in there and change them out and just put different choices that students can do. So if you've got an activity or something that, a test, for example, or an assignment, and then when they're done, these are the things that they can choose from. So I put the same types of activities that you might find in centers, but and add a few in there that are really student centered. So I love doing vocabulary doodles, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But you're going to put, maybe you have an extra credit activity, or maybe vocabulary review game or vocabulary pair work. You get the picture. They can choose from those activities and do those individually. So you're not missing time in the target language, but it's people can have some choices. So this next one, vocabulary doodles, is one of my very favorite activities for learners and in classes. So essentially, anything that involves nouns, the verbs work too. You take a set of words and you simply doodle and label them. It's really as simple as that. And I like it because it gives a lot of opportunities to interact with vocabulary. It also provides people who love to draw something quiet, but that's still language focused at the same time. I'm terrible at drawing, and I remember a lot of vocabulary from doing these vocabulary drawings. They work great with any textbook, and they work great in any language. And they can be a nice downtime that's still language focused. This next activity is exactly as it sounds, game night. So anything that's interactive, any of the games that you might have in your repertoire, instead of having people at all these different centers, you might play a few games as a class. And I'm going to be talking in another presentation about instant games. So I'm not going to get too into games, but thinking about some of the ones you might do, maybe you'll do tic-tac-toe or go fish or a verb conjugation name or a character writing name, something. So basically, it's just an interactive whole class way to practice a set of whatever it is that you're doing. Maybe you've got some games from, there's a lot on Jeopardy Labs, for example, or Pictionary or charades, whatever. You're going to play a few games during that class period. And again, I'm going to talk about instant games that if you've got 5 or 10 minutes, or you want to take a few games and incorporate them into one class period in another video. So I want to thank you so much for listening this week, and we'll talk soon. Bye.